So yeah, because of this a little bit of confusion, my talk is going to focus uh, more on mind wandering and less on a dream than I would have liked, but still, it's certainly very relevant to that topic. And as we discussed previously, let me invite people, if you have questions of clarification, to interrupt me, and then we can take questions of content afterwards. Okay, so mind wandering involves engaging in thoughts unrelated to the current situation or task at hand. And a lot of research that I've been involved in, and some that Kalina Christoph has involved examining the costs of mind wandering. It's associated with disruptions in reading performance. We've all had the experience of reading and suddenly realizing that we have no idea what we've been reading, that our eyes have been moving across the page and our mind has been fundamentally elsewhere. We've had experiences of working memory, where pretty much any situation which is demanding and requires working memory, if you're mind wandering, your performance is going to be less good. It's going to be compromised. Just one second. And then we have also mood. In a famous paper by Killingsworth and Gilbert called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," they showed quite persuasively that when people are mind wandering, on average, they tend to be less happy. Although, hold that thought, because I'll be returning to that in a bit. And it turns out that the statement, "a wandering mind is an unhappy mind," is really an overstatement. So the question is, if we mind wander so much, could there be an upside to mind wandering? Why do we do it so much if it's so problematic in so many different contexts? And that is the topic that I want to explore today. And to consider the possibility that mind wandering may be associated with creative incubation. And this is something that has shown up in the historical record for millennia. So Archimedes famously was characterized as coming up with the solution for how to calculate the volume of the king's crown without melting it while he was mind wandering in the bathtub. He's sort of just sitting there taking a bath, and then suddenly realizes that he can calculate the volume of the crown through water displacement. This is perhaps the most famous example of a situation where mind wandering was associated with creativity, but it's certainly not the only. Another example is perhaps the second most famous, is Poincaré, who reportedly came up with his solution for the application of Fuchsian functions while stepping on a bus. As he tells the story, at the moment when I put my foot on the step, the idea came to me, without anything in my former thoughts seeming to have paved the way for it, that the transformation that I used to define the Fuchsian functions were identical with those of non-Euclidean geometry. So here he is, sort of minding his own business, just stepping on the bus, and in that moment, this idea sort of comes to mind that really helps to transform his thinking about a problem that he'd been struggling with for some time. This same kind of process is also reportedly happened with Szilard in his discovery of the atom bomb. Reportedly, this is how his discovery has been described. Aware of the recent discoveries of the neutron, Szilard thought about the problem, and while crossing on a London street, just one second, so I need to hide. While crossing, Szilard thought about the problem uh, and while crossing London Street a few weeks later, had the sudden realization that if it was an element whose nucleus, when hit by a neutron, would split into two parts and release neutrons, these neutrons could split other nearby atoms. This would lead to a chain reaction in which billions of atoms could be split in a millionth of a second. Another example was Kary Mullis's discovery of DNA. As the story goes, one Friday night in April 1983, while driving to his weekend cabin, Mullis has recorded it suddenly struck him that there was a method of producing unlimited copies of DNA fragments simply and in vitro, i.e. outside living cells. So he's just driving along, and then he comes up with this idea for DNA replication, which ended up winning him the Nobel Prize. And finally, Townes' invention of the laser. The idea for the laser beam dawned upon the physicist Charles Townes while he was sitting on a park bench in Washington, D.C., admiring the azaleas. He suddenly realized how light could be configured into a very pure form. So all of these observations sort of converge on some similar parent claims. First, major discoveries seem to occur when people have been working on a problem for a while and then take a break. Secondly, the solution occurs while mind wandering during the break. So they're just like sitting on a park bench, they're just sitting in the bathtub, driving a car, not actively pursuing the problem. And this is often associated with an aha experience. There's this sort of eureka kind of quality. That's in fact where eureka was perhaps first used. So let's then consider what the relationship between mind wandering and creativity could be. There is some experimental evidence pertaining to this issue. There's evidence coming from my lab and others that when you engage in a non-demanding task after being given a creativity task, that can lead to a increase in performance on a subsequent task, although there have also been some challenges in the replication of that work. And there have also been some interesting individual differences. So for example, the tendency to mind wander is correlated with idea generation. It's correlated with solving remote associates, and but there have also been a little bit of limitations there. If you look at research on the correlation between mindfulness and creativity, there's a modest positive correlation, but it does seem that there's sort of some tendency for the sort of absent-minded professor types who engage in a fair bit of mind wandering to also be more likely to have these spontaneous ideas. So let me now tell you about a project that we did that tried to create a more substantive evidence for these anecdotal demonstrations that creative individuals can have their creative aha experiences outside of the office while mind wandering. So in this study, we asked the question, is mind wandering contribute to the creative ideas of creative professionals? Are ideas associated with mind wandering uniquely associated with overcoming impasses? And we did two replications of the same procedure, but I'm just going to talk about one of them. So in the first study, we had 45 physicists and 53 writers complete a daily creativity journal for 2 weeks. And they then engaged in spontaneous, what we call spontaneous task-independent mind wandering. We measured spontaneous task-independent mind wandering, which is doing something unrelated to work, for example, paying a bill, and thinking about something unrelated to the general idea or problem. So they're not actively pursuing the problem, nor are they at work. And we found that about 20% of their ideas occurred under this classification. We then looked at the ideas that happened during these STEM mind-wandering episodes relative to other situations, such as when they're like at their desk. And what we found was that overall there was no difference in the creativity of these STEM ideas relative to the ideas that they had while they're actively pursuing the task, which might seem like a non-result, but it's actually kind of impressive. It's kind of impressive that the ideas that you have while stepping on the bus are as good as the ideas that you have while you're actively working on a problem. But we also found that these STEM ideas had two really interesting characteristics, both of which really fit with the anecdotal characterizations of them. First, they were more likely to involve overcoming an impasse. So the ideas that individuals had in these situations were more likely to be characterized as addressing a problem that they'd been stumped on. And secondly, they were more likely to have this eureka characteristic. They were more likely to be associated with this sense of aha. Now, in thinking about this, there are actually a couple of mechanisms that may be involved, and let me mention a couple of them. The first is this idea of aha experiences. And one of the things that this raises is one possible value of the aha experience, and that is that it may alert people to the fact that they've come up with something that is true and important. So if you're mind wandering and you have a creative idea, you might just keep moving on and not even notice that you had discovered something important. So the fact that people have these aha experiences may sort of be a alerting element that's a heuristic to go, hey, something important just crossed your mind, let's pay attention to it. The second idea is curiosity, that creative individuals may be more likely to mind wander about ideas that they're interested in. And Einstein famously said that what distinguished him is just that he was passionately curious. And then the third element that may be very important is the Zeigarnik effect. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Zeigarnik effect. There's Bluna Zeigarnik down there. The Zeigarnik effect is really I think, a really fascinating phenomenon, one that I think is under talked about. Discovered by Bluna Zeigarnik in the 1930s in Russia. What she found is that when you gave people tasks to solve, problems to solve, and then if they successfully solved others and didn't successfully solve some, and then she examined which problems did they remember? Did they remember the ones that they successfully solved, or did they remember the ones that they'd failed to solve? And interestingly, you might think that they'd remember their successes, but to the contrary, they remembered their failures. They remembered the problems that they failed to solve. And so this suggests that when we reach an impasse, when we fail to solve a problem that we're interested in, that this may create this increased accessibility of the very problem that we're thinking about. And that may cause us to mind wander about it and for sort of solutions to pop up in a novel context. So I'd like to sort of explore some research that has addressed all three of these different possible elements of this idea that creative mind wandering may be associated with, or that mind wandering may be associated with creativity.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Just a quick clarification questions about the previous studies that you mentioned. So are the method that you use was experiential sampling?
That's right.
And it's sort of spontaneously.
Actually, that's not quite right. I went through that kind of quickly. It was a journal study. So we had writers and physicists, and every day, at the end of the day, we probed them and asked them if they had any creative ideas that day. And if they did, we asked them the context under which they had those ideas. So did they have the idea while they were at work? Did they have the idea when they were not at work? And if they had the idea when they were not at work, were they actively pursuing the problem? Or were they doing something unrelated, such as taking a shower?
I see. And then assessment of that creativity aspect and so on are all based on the rating of the script.
Thank you for that question. Yes, the evaluation of the creativity was by the person themselves. So at the end of the day, they also indicated how creative they thought that particular idea was. We also contacted them 3 months later, and we asked them. We gave them the ideas that they had come up with the 3 months before, and asked them to indicate how creative they thought the idea was then. So we're able to sort of look at the long term, the enduring quality of these ideas. And the effects that we reported were maintained over those 3 months.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you sorry for rushing through that. Okay, so now let me turn to first talk about these aha experiences. Actually, you know what? Just excuse me 1 second. I'm just going to stop share for just a second, and I'm realizing I've got a penultimate version of this talk going. So just give me 1 second to get the right version here. Okay, thank you for your patience. Let's see here. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's funny. Let's see here. Seem to be stuck in. All right, we'll just go through like this. Okay, so do aha experiences signal important discoveries? This is research that was done by Lokanen, Webb, and Tangen. Actually, it's in press in cognitive, or it's published in cognition. And we examined the possibility that ahas may be a key source of judgments of the merit of an idea. And so the idea here is that ahas are not just some epiphenomena, but rather they actually are causal in helping us to appreciate when we're on to a good idea. And so this would be very useful for mind wandering, because it would wake you up and go, hey, something important has just crossed your mind. So there is some evidence for this. For example, aha experiences are typically accompanied by emotional reactions. And I think also very intriguingly, aha experiences are predictive of accurate responses. So if you give, for example, people remote associates, and you look to see how they say they solved it. Remote associates are sets of 3 words which have a 4th word that relates to all 3 of the words. And people can solve remote associates either through an aha kind of experience or more analytically. And when they have the aha experience, they're more likely to they're more likely to come up with an accurate response. So aha is actually an indicator of accuracy. But if this is the case, if we use aha experiences as sort of a heuristic for the truth and for the worthiness of an idea, then it's also possible that aha experiences could lead to misattributions of truth. And this is a study that was conducted with Ruben Laukkanen as the lead author, and published in Cognition. So what we did is we gave people propositions that sometimes first required them to unscramble anagrams. So we asked them knackaroos keep growing until they die, or we'd ask them kangaroos keep growing until they die. And then in either case, they'd have to indicate how true they thought that statement tended to be. And what we found, and on each trial, we measured their truth rating, their self-reported aha experiences, and what we found was that those items that were presented or that were solved, so the anagrams that they solved, regardless of if they solved them, we always gave them the right answer. Those items that were solved by themselves were more likely to be called true than those that we had to give them the solution for. And furthermore, they had more of an aha when they solved them than not, and the aha accounted for this increase in truthiness. So what this suggests, and this was also true incidentally, both for the true items and also for the false ones. So even if it's not, I don't actually remember if it's the case that kangaroos keep growing until they die, but regardless, if you solve an anagram that gives you an aha experience associated with that statement, you're more likely to think that it is in fact true. And we've replicated this, and we've shown that also worldviews, if you solve an anagram corresponding to a worldview, you're more likely to endorse that worldview. So this leads to this idea of aha misattribution, that solving an anagram leads to an aha emotional experience that is misattributed to the truthiness of the claim. This explains the effect of solving, because when you solve something, you think that is, it's useful to have this aha experience because it actually can be meaningfully associated with the truth of something. It also explains why items solved with an aha are perceived as more true than those without an aha. And it's consistent with the utility of aha experiences as a heuristic for evaluating truth. So the basic idea is that aha is not really just an epiphenomena, it's actually an embodied way that we signal to ourselves that we're onto something, that we should pay attention, that this is an idea to sort of unpack. So ahas may alert people when mind wandering that they have an idea of merit. So this may be really, ahas may be especially useful when people are mind wandering, because it alerts them to this important idea that they've just stumbled on. So the second sort of speculative mechanism that I'd like to consider here is the idea that creative individuals are more likely to mind wander about ideas that they are interested in. And I'm going to sort of start with a sort of a roundabout way of getting to this point, and then I'll get at it more directly. So let me tell you about a different study where we're basically looking at what are the characteristics of mind wandering that are associated with creativity. I'm using the words mind wandering and daydreaming interchangeably, and both sort of loosely defined. In the following discussion with Kalina, we can sort of talk about various more precise definitions. So in this study, we developed a daydreaming scale where essentially daydreaming was talking about any situation in which you're having thoughts that are unrelated to the situation around you. And we assessed daydreaming both in the lab and with a 5-day experience sampling procedure. And then we also assessed creativity in the lab. We looked at convergent and divergent thinking tasks, including unusual uses and remote associates, self-reports of creative behavior, and a creative writing assignment in which we had participants write a creative story, and then we evaluated it for creativity. I'm just going to go through some of the major findings of this. There's a lot more details that I'm going to skip over. And then we also had them do a daydreaming experience sampling task in which they reported their creative behaviors and inspiration at the end of each day, as well as their mind wandering or daydreaming. And in this study, we identified 7 sort of styles of daydreaming, 7 sort of key elements that seem to be important. And again, this is not to say that there aren't others, but these are the ones that we focused on in this particular study. That was pleasant, unpleasant. So the daydream left me with warm, happy feelings. Planning. I was thinking about things that might happen in a few days. Meaningful daydreaming. I daydreamed about something important that is of great value, or sorry, I daydreamed about something that is of great value or importance to me. Sexual thoughts. I daydreamed about somebody I desire sexually. Unaware, intentional. I was hardly aware of the fact that I was daydreaming. And fantastical. The idea that came to me during the daydream were funny and bizarre. And the key results that I want to highlight here is that first, we found that 2 of these elements were seemingly particularly associated with creativity. And that was meaningful daydreaming and fantastical daydreaming, where both were linked with better creative writing in the lab and with more creative behavior and inspiration in day-to-day life. So these 2 elements seem to be sort of components that seem to maybe, or at least associated with individuals who have greater creativity. And although just correlational, it suggests that creative individuals may be more likely to engage in interesting daydreaming. So there's this, I think, meaningful possibility here that creative individuals are daydreaming about topics that are especially interesting, about meaningful things and about fantastical things. So I'll come up with more support for this curiosity element as we explore the 3rd conjecture, and that's the relevance of the Zeigarnik effect. Here, the idea is that impasses may increase mind wandering about creative problems, which may enable them to be considered in novel contexts. So this is an idea that I mentioned before. You'll recall in the study that we did with the writers and the physicists that we found that the ideas that they had during these the STEM mind wandering, which is a little bit different, nevertheless involved overcoming impasses in particular. And the Zeigarnik effect suggests that when you reach an impasse on something, that may increase the accessibility of that problem. So it seems quite plausible that that these ideas on which you reach impasses may be ideas that we are going to be likely to mind wander about, and they may be something that we sort of curiously inspect, these unsolved questions that we just find ourselves keep coming back to. So this is a project which we're calling Curious Daydreaming, that again is exploring this idea of these curious impasse-related daydreaming experiences. And the question we asked is, in addition to the 7-dimension, or the 2 dimensions that I mentioned in particular, fantastical daydreaming and meaningful daydreaming, are creative people especially likely to engage in curious daydreaming about topics on which they have reached an impasse? And if so, how might impasse curiosity driven daydreaming distinguish creative writers from regular people? So we have a particular group of creative individuals, and the question is, are these creative individuals, are they more likely to engage in this curious daydreaming than matched controls? So first we developed this creative daydreaming, this curious daydreaming scale using MTurk, and then we did an experience sampling study. So we had 2 pilot studies in which we used 2 different measures of creative behavior. There's the creative behavior inventory, which is sort of more everyday creativity, such as arts and crafts projects, writing plays, stories, songs, or poems. And the creative achievement questionnaire, which involves more sort of substantial creative successes, such as publishing a poem or doing something, having a painting showed at an art gallery, that type of thing. We measured various different self-report scales such as rumination, social desirability, and curiosity. I'll return to those in a moment because this helps us to sort of sharpen our construct. And then we also evaluated both the 7 mind-wandering styles that I alluded to before, and also curious daydreaming. And here are some examples of curious daydreaming items. The daydream revolved around an unfinished task or project. I daydreamed about an intriguing question that I've yet to find the answer to. The daydreaming led to the solution to a problem or question that had previously stumped me. And we basically asked them to think about their most recent daydream and to what degree did these various different characteristics correspond to that most recent daydream. And then we correlated this with various different things.
Hey, Jonathan,
Yes.
just a quick clarification. So the curiosity here defined seems to be also related to the persistency or sort of, the kind of attitude that you try to get, solve the difficult problem for a longer time. Is that pretty much the case?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting question. So you might think, for example, and this would be something that we might want to explore in future research, that it might be, for example, correlated with grit, which is a tendency to persevere on problems. So I think that's an intriguing idea. We did correlate it. There are 2 different measures of curiosity. There is a general interest curiosity, which involves being just generally interested in things. And then there's something called, I'm blanking on what it's called, but basically the idea is these curious about a deprivation curiosity is what it's called, where you are where you're particularly curious about things that are unsolved. And we had speculated that this would particularly correlate with deprivation curiosity, but we actually found that it correlated equally with both. I see that I'm about to run out of power. I don't have my power cord. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
Can you quiet the bird? Okay, I'm back.
Okay, and maybe after you come back. So
Go ahead.
the curiosity that you're talking is a bit different from some kind of a general curiosity to want to know more about different kind of things, broadly and shallowly kind of curiosity, right?
Well,
that's the point. Yeah.
yes, but actually it correlates just about it correlated with epistemic curiosity quite substantially. I think about a 0.34. So it's very related to that kind of curiosity.
Okay.
But it did not correlate with social desirability, or, and this might have been a concern, rumination. So you might be concerned that maybe this has something to do with sort of worrying about problems, but it was not correlated with that. So it seems to be specifically sort of thinking about problems that captivate you. I think that it's very close to the kind of curiosity that Einstein experienced when he was, just constantly sort of thinking about these issues of flying at the end of a beam of light. So what we found in this study was that curious daydreaming correlated with both types of creative behavior and creative achievement. So the more everyday kind and the more infrequent kind and fantastical, replicating the previous study, fantastical daydreaming also independently predicted behavior. We didn't find the meaningful daydreaming correlating in this study. So that was a little bit of a disappointment, but we still have some significant predictors of relationships between creativity and certain kinds of daydreaming. Then the further thing we did was then to look at comparing a large group of writers to age-matched non-writers who were also in white-collar occupations. These individuals were recruited through online ads in several big cities. And the first question, not surprisingly, is do these groups differ in terms of creativity? And when we compared them with respect to the metrics of creativity that I mentioned in the last study, we found that the creative behavior and creative achievement of the writers was about twice that of our control group. So we do have this sort of more creative group of writers compared to a group of age-matched white-collar professionals. So what do we do with them? Well, first we gave them the various different daydreaming styles scale that I talked about in the previous study, and as I already gave you the results with respect to creative behavior inventory and creative achievement questionnaire. And then we did a 6-day experience sampling study where participants were probed throughout the day about their daydreaming. And then at the end of the day, we asked them about if they had any creative ideas that day and how inspired they felt at the end of the day. And we were then, first off, able to look at the differences between the writers and the non-writers with respect to the contents of their daydreaming. And consistent with our pilot study comparing just MTurks participants, we found that the writers and the non-writers differed specifically with respect to the frequency of curious daydreaming and also fantastical daydreaming. So again, suggesting that these kinds of daydreaming may be particularly associated with creative individuals. We also looked at the frequency with which they reported daydreaming about these things during the experience sampling. And again, curious daydreaming and fantastical daydreaming emerged as being more prevalent in the writers than in the non-writers. The other difference was that the writers were more likely to report thinking about sexually related ideas, and this may just be a matter of disclosure. They may be sort of more self-disclosing, but we haven't seen of this being predictive in the past, so I wouldn't make too much of that. So writers report more fantastical daydreaming. They report more curious, and there's more sexual daydreaming, but that just would be that they're more honest. So what about, and this is, I think, the most exciting aspect of the study, what about the relationship between daydreaming and creativity within those groups? Can we predict from within group differences? And here, there are two different kinds of things that we'd want to think about with respect to within a particular group differences. The most exciting one is within subject predictors. Does a participant daydream more or less in a particular style on a given day relative to other days? So if on days you're having more curious daydreaming, are you also more likely to report more creative ideas? And then between subject differences, are those individuals within a particular group more likely to have a particular style of, are they more likely to be, let me try this again, are within a particular group, are individuals who are having a particular style of daydreaming more likely to also report more creative behavior than individuals who are reporting less of that style? All right, So let's talk about this. First off, the within subject differences. So among the non-writers, we found that variations in curious daydreaming and pleasant daydreaming were associated with greater behavior, creative behavior. So what that suggests is, and we also saw that among the writers, curious daydreaming was associated with more creative behavior on that day. So those days in which people are engaging in more curious daydreaming are also the days in which they report the more creative ideas at the end of the day, suggesting potentially, it's still correlational, but it's increasingly suggestive that the curious daydreaming may be actually contributing to the creative solutions. With respect to between subject differences, we found that curious daydreamers in the non-writers were more likely to report increased creative behavior, and pleasantness was associated with between subject differences among writers, suggesting that it may be that if you're having pleasant daydreams, that may potentially be helpful for writers, although, again, that's just correlational. So collectively, these findings suggest that it may be useful to cultivate something that I like to call mind wandering. Basically, the idea here is that all daydreaming is not the same, that there's a particular category of daydreaming, and I do think that this fits very nicely with some of the work that Kalina talked about a month ago with respect to spontaneous mind wandering. That there's a sort of style of mind wandering which is curious, involving unsolved puzzles and fantastical thinking. And it may be this kind of curious, playful, irreverent mind wandering that is particularly likely to promote creativity. And let me come back to that point that I had mentioned before about the mind wandering and mood. As you recall, I mentioned that Killingsworth and Gilbert found that individuals who are mind wandering, when they're mind wandering, tend to be less happy than when they're on task. But we did a follow-up study where we replicated that basic finding. So this was an experience sampling study. And we pinged people periodically over a week, and we asked them if they were mind wandering or not. And if they were mind wandering, we further asked them how interesting they found their mind wandering, how useful and how novel it was. And what we found was that overall, when people were off task, they were less happy than when they were on task. So this replicates the sort of disappointing results of Killingsworth and Gilbert. But critically, we found that when they were mind wandering about something particularly interesting, they were actually happier than when they were on task. So it seems that a wandering mind is not necessarily an unhappy mind, at least not when people are mind wandering. When they're thinking about something that they find especially interesting, that actually can be quite engaging, and as the previous research suggests, potentially indicative of or productive of creativity. So the final question I want to ask is, can we foster curious mind wandering creativity? Could there be ways of getting people to do this more often? And one way that I think is quite promising, this is still research that we're just really initiating, is to cultivate openness to experience. As you may know, openness to experience is correlated with curiosity and creativity quite highly. So it seems quite, and also with daydreaming. So it seems quite possible that if you cultivated openness to experience, you might cultivate this curious daydreaming. It also has lots of other positive correlations, including being associated with metacognitive awareness, intellectual humility. It's actually associated with career advancement, and in fact, it's associated with longevity suggesting that cultivating open, open openness to experience might support childlike wonder and staying young at heart. I should mention, I know I'm going rather fast here, openness to experience is one of the big 5 personality traits. It's associated with being interested in doing different things, with an appreciation of the arts, with curiosity and creativity, and daydreaming. It is a major dimension in humans. Interestingly, though, as people get older, they show declines in openness to experience. The possibility of cultivating openness to experience may also be an approach that could encourage people to actually sort of stay young at heart.
Jonathan,
Yes.
again, quick clarification. So
Mhm.
here, what kind of metacognitive awareness are you talking about?
Yeah, this is basically a appreciation of it's very closely related to intellectual humility. It's an appreciation that individuals can see things from a different perspective than you do. So it's
Ah,
really
I
to,
see.
just to step back and see the bigger picture.
Like knowing that you don't know, or kind of
Exactly. Right.
that. Yeah, all
Exactly.
right. Great.
Um, Okay, so in terms of fostering open experience, what do we know about that? There have been some approaches that have been successful in fostering it. One approach is supervised psychedelic experiences. McLean et al. In a very sort of seminal paper found that individuals who'd undergone supervised psychedelic experiences showed enduring increases in openness to experience. And there's also research, very recent research, indicating that a 2-week engagement with an app that encourages people to engage in novel experiences may foster openness to experience. And the way they do this is you create implementation intentions, which are these if-then statements, such as, let's see, I think I have an example here. If I come home after work, then I'm going to try a new recipe. And this study actually found that people doing 2 weeks of this ended up showing increased openness to experience. Now, although openness to experience seems like a worthy quality to cultivate, there are some limitations to it. First, it's associated with daydreaming, which in principle could lead to distraction. So there is this sort of concern that you could go too far. If you cultivated too much, you might just be too much of a absent-minded professor. And secondly, it's been associated with risk-taking and potentially with recklessness. So these 2 aspects we think may be tempered by a slight moderation to cultivating openness to experience. And that's something that I'm calling open mindfulness. So sort of 2 terms that 2 memes that I'm trying to plant in your brains here is mind wandering and open mindfulness. And open mindfulness we're defining as cultivating simultaneously openness to experience along with mindfulness. And so the idea is that creativity, that you get the benefits of both if you do this. So cultivating openness to experience will foster creativity, and then the mindfulness will allow for awareness and discernment, so reducing the costs of distraction and perhaps recklessness. So we're currently engaged in several projects to cultivate open mindfulness in collaboration with my graduate student, Madeline Gross, and Judd Brewer at Brown. We're developing an app that combines openness to experience implementation intentions and also mindfulness activities, trying to basically foster both of these simultaneously. And then with my partner, Amanda Gregory, we are creating immersive sound experiences that combine meditation instructions with psychedelic visuals and sound in order to basically create psychedelic-like experiences that are grounded in a mindfulness mindset. And the idea is that combining these various different features together may help people to simultaneously enhance their openness to experience while also enhancing mindfulness. So, in summary, I've provided some anecdotal accounts of creative ideas occurring while daydreaming, and I've also reported a experience sampling or journal study of writers and physicists that indicated that indeed a significant proportion of creative ideas happen during these spontaneous task-independent mind-wandering episodes. And we find that these are associated with more ahas and more overcoming of impasses than the ideas that people have while they're at work at their desks. I've also argued that ahas may signal the merit of ideas. So one value of ahas, they may not just be sort of epiphenomena, they may be sort of the way that the mind alerts us when we might otherwise have missed it, that we've had an important idea, one to stop and pay attention to. And while that is very useful in many contexts, it also can be misleading and may lead to misattributions of the merit of an idea. So if you have an aha, it will make you think that a true idea is true, but it also may lead you to think that a false idea is true. And I talked about the anagram study, which supported that. We've also provided evidence that there are certain types of daydreaming that may be especially associated with creativity. These include fantastical daydreaming, curious daydreaming about unanswered questions. And we've seen that this curious kind of daydreaming seems to be especially potent. And then finally, I've introduced some speculations. Actually, some of those claims are themselves a bit speculative, but there's at least some empirical evidence for them. The first is this Zeigarnik idea that reaching an impasse may lead to daydreaming about interesting questions, that if you're a creative individual and you are working on a creative problem and you reach an impasse, that may cause you to spontaneously daydream about that idea, and that may then lead to solutions. And secondly, that fostering openness to experience and mindfulness may promote curious mind wandering and mind wondering, along with a host of other benefits. And so we think that a really promising direction forward is to create courses and apps that help people to simultaneously cultivate their openness to experience and also their mindfulness. And then with that, let me just leave you with a closing thought, that if you were mind wandering during this talk, I'm hoping it was about something interesting. And then finally, just a quick acknowledgement of my many collaborators who contributed to this work. And again, my apologies for the late start, and I'd happy to entertain questions now.
Thank you very much. It's great that you compose yourself so nicely and gave a very coherent and very entertaining talk. And the topic that you gave was really, right spot on to our consciousness research network. So you really engaged many of the attendees until the end, although it's over time. So I think I want to take more questions if you're okay,
Sure.
available, Jonathan. And also, especially the panel, you can also ask questions or give comments. Do you have any burning questions, Thomas, first?
Yes, I have a question about this different types of mind wandering that you report, and the fact that when you dive into the content that people report, you can actually see that we have a more varied picture than the classical one of mind wandering is making you unhappy and so on. And I was wondering if you had some data or intuitions about where these different content will come from. And when I started studying mind wandering, I was interested in understanding what happens to me when I'm on a bus and thinking about very, very interesting things, very engaging, very immersive. But when you're doing a task, since you are doing something in parallel, very often your mind wandering is about short snippets of I need to do this, I need to do that. And in the data that I presented before your talk, we showed that this is often related to low states of arousal, so people being tired. So do you think that this could be a way maybe to disentangle the different form of mind wandering? Maybe there's some form of mind wandering that happens to us because we're a bit overwhelmed or a bit tired. And maybe it's something we engage voluntarily in, and then we touch to topics that are of interest to us. We might be more happy about it, might be more creative. So do you think maybe we should maybe split the different types of mind wandering about the, according to their origins and not only their contents?
Yeah, I think that's really the way that the field is moving in recognizing that there are these really quite different kinds of styles and topics, qualities of mind wandering, and that they have very different consequences. And then beginning to sort of create a taxonomy of these different categories, and then seeing how the different categories fit into the larger picture. So it's really sort of, you know, mind wandering daydreaming 2.0. Although it should be said that even the original Singer, they talked about these issues. So we're in some ways we're also rediscovering ideas that were explored long ago and then got a little bit lost, I think. But yes, I think that it's really intriguing to think about what are the different circumstances that may contribute to different styles or qualities of mind wandering. And notice that we found that there was no relationship between rumination and curious mind wandering, even though curious mind wandering involved, you know, in some sense, thinking about unsolved problems. So it seems like this is you know, a very different style. It makes sense to me that if people are stressed and under cognitive load and tired, that's not going to be conducive to this playful, irreverent mind wandering. Whereas if they're, say, walking in nature or on a vacation in some sort of relaxed setting, that may be precisely the type of a situation that may be helpful. And I think it's also one thing that I would love to see moving forward is you know, applying a more of a Kalina's approach to this and looking at the degree to which these things are sort of being directed necessarily towards one thing, or whether they're sort of spontaneously jumping from one thing to another thing to another element, and understanding a little bit more about the process as well as the content. So I think that there is really a lot to be further unpacked regarding both the different kinds of mind wandering that people can engage in, and the consequences of these different kinds of mind wandering, and the conditions that tend to promote them.
Okay, let me make some announcements. So people who have other engagement, you can leave because we are a bit over time, but we will distribute the recording of this video. And I hope that you are okay still to answer 3 more questions.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Yeah. And yeah, before going that questions, maybe Kalina, could you ask your question? Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. And Thomas's comments also led me towards, you know, my partly question, partly comment as well, because I think what's happening, and it's a very positive development, is that we used to think about human thinking in terms of problem solving. And if you would open a textbook, you would see under thinking things like reasoning and problem solving. That was all that. So basically executive type of thinking. And so one of the really positive developments around the field with the introduction of the concept of mind wandering, which Jonathan Schooler has a huge credit for, is that now we're expanding how we think about thinking, right? So thinking is no longer about the directed problem-solving approach, but it's actually all these other things that happen. And one of the really interesting questions, what are all these other things that happen? Because we don't necessarily have introspective access to all the things that happen under the hood that contribute to a lot of our thinking in much more spontaneous ways. And so this is what both Jonathan and I have really looked into very closely. And so I'm really excited to hear, Jonathan, because a lot of what I see here is a very important thread in a lot of this recent work that you talked about, and some of the less recent work about linking the more motivational and emotional processes that actually drive a lot of our under the hood thinking, right? So starting with the aha phenomenon, which, as you pointed out, is very much linked to emotional salience in some way. And going back to the curious and fantastical daydreaming, all these are kinds of influences and actually determinants of thinking and kinds of thinking that are very much driven by things that are that are not executive, that are motivational, emotional, and so forth. And some of the fantastical daydreaming actually has a lot to do with simulation, like how we simulate. And so one of my questions for you, Jonathan, was how is your thinking changing as you go along in terms of appreciating these kinds of emotional and motivational influences that we actually don't have direct access to? We could image people's brains, and neuroscience has actually been a very good tool to emphasize the importance of them. But you've taken an approach from more behavioral perspective, which is really valuable as well. And is your thinking changing in any way? For example, I know that you are putting a grain of salt now into the claim about mind-wandering mind always being an unhappy mind. And partly around that, how is your thinking changing in terms of the importance and the value of these non-executive type of processes for thinking?
Yeah, I think that that thinking really involves this, and this fits with work that we've done in the past as well. It involves a fluctuation back and forth between the sort of focused executive processing and the more free-floating default mode network kind of thinking. And this really relates to a lot of different aspects. So creativity, the idea generation phase, happens oftentimes when you're stepping on the bus, when you're in that sort of relaxed, irreverent kind of place. But then you have the aha experience, and then you have to do the hard work. There's no free lunch. You then do have to sort of sit down and carefully apply that executive resource process and sort out, did I really have a good idea here, or am I just sort of overwhelmed with the emotion of the moment? The emotion, that aha, may actually sort of help encourage you to go, wow, this is something worthy of the pain of going into that executive state, which is more effortful. So I think that recognizing the value of both. So, and of course there are other modes as well, but critically, sort of recognizing the value of being facile and shifting back and forth between this capacity for sort of spontaneous daydreaming versus the unpacking it executive is really important. And that's also why I think this idea of cultivating open mindfulness may be so helpful, because you're basically sort of helping people to both develop their daydreaming capacities with the openness to experience, but also their focus and discernment with the mindfulness. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question.
Okay, so then let me represent two of the questions from the audience related to the aha moment. One is that the aha moment do you think it's associated with a tendency or a personal trait of a conspiracy theory thinking, like
Mm,
a misattribution of the truth?
yeah,
Have you
yeah.
thought about it?
Yes. So this is a serious concern. I'm blanking on Nash. John, was it John Nash, Beautiful Mind?
Yeah.
So Nash is credited as saying that one of the reasons, as many of you may know, he was a Nobel Prize winner, a brilliant mathematician in game theory, who also created all these extreme delusional thoughts. And one of the things he said is that one of the reasons he believed the delusional thoughts is because they had the same quality as his mathematical insights. And so I think that this is a real liability of that aha. It's that this aha mechanism, which can be so useful, you know, and help Nash to recognize that he had these important discoveries, can also contribute to delusional thinking. It's the darks in our paper is called the dark side of Eureka, and I really do think that there's something to that. And also, we also find that individuals who engage in aberrant salience and have magical ideation tend to be more creative. So there seems to be this sort of loose thinking, which on the one hand can be associated with creative breakthroughs, but on the other hand can also be associated with you know, irrational thinking. It's worth noting that Newton, you know, spent a lot of his time, in addition to, you know, basically creating the foundations of modern science, in alchemy. And so these very same traits can have a dark side, and I think that's something to be wary of. And again, this is why I like the idea of open mindfulness. That it's important to sort of encourage people to think out of the box, but also to encourage them to develop a discernment. And I do sort of tend to travel. I've done. I'll admit it to this group that I've done research in parapsychology, and I've interacted with people in that field. And I do sometimes find that that these creative individuals don't necessarily bring to the table the degree of rigor that they need. We need to be able to take those creative ideas, that openness thing, but then bring it back and critically examine it under the spotlight of deep executive thinking, and oftentimes that doesn't get done.
Okay. And it's a little bit related to this, but can this mind wandering be a mental capacity that appeared in the recent time, but in the ancient world is a less used capacity because it was not functional or something like that? You know, it's a kind of the question of, you know, evolutionary origin or evolutionary psychological kind of an explanation of mind wandering and how it relates to other things, such as also, you know, body motion, or also, you know, your study on the metacognition, that was quite, you know, potentially related to this type of the question. But what's your thought about this type of the question?
I mean, you always have to recognize that when you're sort of talking about evolutionary stories, that they're sort of just so stories, and I think that there's value to them, but you also sort of want to take them with a grain of salt. But if you watch like a deer at a lake, you know, that will put its head down and drink, and then it'll look around, and then it'll put its head down again. And so I think that we have a long evolutionary history of having to alternate back and forth between multiple things that are vying for our attention. I think that historically the sources of what vied for our attention were external. So paying attention to the water versus paying attention to the possible predator. And that as we evolve these, large frontal lobes that were able to sort of carry on engaged internal thought, that all of a sudden we have another source that is vying for our attention, not just the predator versus the possible food, but the possible food versus engaging and thinking about some plan or something that isn't in our immediate vicinity. And I think that newer quality to have competing internal trains of thought that are unrelated to the here and now probably is a characteristic that increasingly is observed by humans and less by other animals. Although I'm reminded of Kalina, I'm trying to remember the name of our shared colleague, Stan, was it?
Lorenzo?
No, maybe it's not Stan. He studied animals, dogs in particular. Anyhow, he
Yeah.
yes, Stan Corey, yeah. So he told the story about seeing his dog walking up to or seeing a sunny spot on the floor, sort of staring at it for a moment, and then running off, grabbing his dog mat and moving it into the sunny spot. And it's intriguing to think that the dog looked at that and then sort of had this, thought, that would be a good place to put my mat, and then ran off, put it there. So I do think it's possible that animals may also sort of have this sort of thinking about things not in the current present and then draw on those. But I do think that essentially what's happened with mind wandering is that it's taken this task switching process that typically is applied between external things and now switched it to being a switch between internal versus external.
Mm. And Jonathan, just a follow-up on this. Do you know of any study that studied mind wandering in pre-industrial population or in contexts that are not the classical modern industrial civilization?
I don't. I'm reminded of, and I'd love to pass that to Kalina to see if she has any thoughts about that. But it does sort of remind me of the classic bicameral mind hypothesis, which suggested that in ancient times that people essentially attributed when they mind wandered, they thought it was the gods speaking to them. And I mean, I think that the evidence for that is not there, but it's an intriguing possibility that that there may have been in ancestral times sort of a different relationship to the way that they thought about the internalization of dialogue, and may have possibly thought that was God's speaking to them, and sort of a variation on the Vygotsky idea that thought is internalized conversation, but they are thinking that their conversation is actually with some other being. But I don't know of any. I don't know of any study looking at mind wandering in more primitive or whatever the politically correct term is cultures. Kalina, do you?
I don't think that those studies have been done, but we do talk about that in the handbook that Jonathan, you contributed on spontaneous thought. And spontaneous thought has been my particular interest, partly because thoughts that occur spontaneously are so surprising that people have struggled over the millennia with how to attribute them. And it's actually a fairly recent evolutionary historical attribution that we attribute them to our own minds. This is a historical anomaly almost. And partly it's just the appreciation of the importance of the brain to cognition, because prior to that, for millennia, people were attributing to external sources because they don't feel that we're their agent right? They don't feel part of our agency. And agency has been such a big part of what we attribute internally. And actually one of the huge developments, which the science is really helpfully contributing, is to say that actually a lot of the things that happen in our minds that we don't have agency over are still attributable to our minds and brains in ways that we don't have access to. So it's actually a form of humility that we've had to develop, and we're still working on as species, that our bodies, I see a lot of questions about movement here, which does have a lot of effects on our thinking. Our bodies create these thoughts, and suddenly they arise, and they feel so sudden and genuine and sometimes insightful. And if you throw in the mixture some kind of a mystic experience, it's just so compelling that they would be sent by a deity, right? If you believe in one. But at the same time, what we know from neuroscience is that actually what we show is that people's hippocampuses sparkle those things seconds before they're even aware of them. So we have this variation structure in our brain that generates things that are so surprising that we want to attribute them to gods.
And Jenny is also making comments that there are similar questions for dreaming. And it seems like the idea historically for dreaming being also message from the gods. So there may be some kind of parallel there. So.
And there are some.
I was going to say there's some interesting work by Carrie Morridge, who's done looking at people's feeling of significance of spontaneous thought. So once you go beyond the God explanation, people start attributing some more genuine insights into spontaneous thoughts and dreams. So if I dreamt about something, that must reveal something about the true core of myself, more than if I just thought about it intentionally, or if something spontaneously occurred, that shows something about my soul or my, some inner nature. So there's these beliefs that people have, which are interesting to examine, that are post-religious, perhaps, but they're still not necessarily, they're still interesting from my perspective.
I also wanted to mention, Jenny actually mentioned an idea to me long ago, which I thought really had a lot of merit. The fact that Gilbert, or Killingsworth and Gilbert found that mind wandering tends to be, more likely to be negative than positive, is related to dream data, which also suggests that there's a sort of disproportionate amount of negativity in dreams, and the possibility that both of these may be engaging in some one sort of function in both cases is sort of rehearsing possible negative things, negative outcomes that one wants to avoid. And so dreams are giving you an opportunity to practice how to getting yourself out of difficult situations, and daydreaming may also serve that function. And while it certainly is very helpful for us in this present day to come up with all sorts of creative ideas, our number one goal, at least particularly evolutionarily, would have been to avoid getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers and things like that. And so mind wandering about the possible risk of getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger could have been historically useful, and some of the negativity may be a evolutionary vestige of mind wandering having a purpose that it really no longer is as useful for.
Unless it ruined your sleep, which would make you more likely for getting eaten by the...
That's true.
Okay, I mean, because we are a bit over time, but I think, we discussed quite a bit of interesting things. So maybe we can finish without post-talk discussion, because we already had some, quite useful things. But with one last kind of comment or questions, and then I want to close. Is that all right? So I think your next sort of the goal of enhancing creativity, or how to harness the creativity through psychedelics, are actually quite interesting and promising if it's useful. But also your sort of study, your own study, showing that the aha moment itself increase a misattribution of the truth. This could be kind of complicate your situation, right? For example, the people who come out from psychedelic experience seems to have confidence about their insights, but it could be also enhanced through the misattribution of this aha moment. So how can you deal with this question?
I think this is exactly right. I think that it's a two-edged sword, and that we need to recognize that, and that just sort of enhancing that open-minded perspective, and perhaps finding ways to create more aha experiences alone does raise this specter of making people more at risk for having false ahas, and also we haven't looked at this, but it also makes sense that false ahas would also be likely to sort of stick more. And so if you have an idea with an aha, you're not only wrong, but you may pursue it in a way that you might not otherwise. So these are serious concerns that should be addressed straight on, as opposed to sort of swept under the table. And this is again where I come back to this idea of complementing the openness to experience with mindfulness, with creating a practice of developing discernment and focused attention, and really engaging in executive learning how to do sort of sustained executive focus, so that after you have that aha, you are able to critically inspect and investigate that idea, and also take the same openness to experience that you're applying to the idea itself, to recognizing that just because you had an aha doesn't necessarily mean that your idea is right. Cultivating intellectual humility and recognizing that you may not be right about ideas, I think is really an important component. So it's really we're going to require cultivating multiple skills and cultivating the ability to sort of shift between different modes of thought.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, it almost sounds like a really good advice to the society as a whole, or even the science practice as a whole. They may need to get some kind of practice of admitting mistakes, or being open to new ideas, kind of thing. So would be very interesting thoughts.
It's a mission. It's a mission.
Okay, great. With that, I think that's a good point to end. Thanks a lot, Jonathan, and Karina, and Thomas, and Jenny for the joining panel, and also the audience. Thanks for lots of excellent questions. And so, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, organizers.
Yeah,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye.